What's up, guys? Adventure 207 RC here. And if you're watching this video, then that means you have purchased the files to print your own Fugly Truggy chassis. First off, I just want to say thank you so much. It means a lot that you guys not only like the work that I do, but are willing to support me in doing it. And the money that I make selling the files for these, as well as any of the other products that I come out with, will go back into helping me grow my YouTube channel, as well as helping me grow my product catalog and offer some things for the SCX24 enthusiasts like me that you just can't get anywhere else on the market. So I'll go ahead and get right into this video, and I'm going to show you how you go about installing this chassis extension, what you need, and let's get into it. Okay, so firstly, I should mention, this was designed as a chassis extension, very similar to the LGRP Ultra 24 kit. So you will need a stock set of SCX24 rails. Now, if you're gonna buy a box stock, ready-to-run SCX24 to put this onto, get the C10, because you need the C10 chassis rails and you're going to need the C10 cab, unless of course you're going to try to come up with something else for a cab or run it without a cab, which obviously is, you know, that's up to you. If you're going to use the stock rails like I did, you need to modify them. And what I mean is, right out of the box, they're too long to work with this chassis. So what you're going to do, at the front side of them, you're going to go ahead and you're going to cut both of those chassis rails off just in front of your first hole. After you come off of the bottom of the chassis, up the rise where it flattens out again, that first hole on the front of the chassis, cut the rails off just in front of that. And then on the rear, after you go up over the rise and it flattens out, that first hole, cut it off just behind that. You want this hole and this hole. Those are the holes you want. Those are the ones you're going to need to mount this. Now, as far as the easiest way to put this all together, because you're also going to need a stock skid plate. I'm going to go ahead and throw mine together with the motor and transmission already bolted to the skid plate, just because I've had all of this stuff all together once on the first version of this chassis to test everything. So, just makes it easier. Now, right off the bat, I'll go ahead and I'll mention this chassis was designed around an 050 motor size and a stock transmission. Because of that, you should be able to fit any 050 size motor, and you'll fit any 030 or stock size motor, as well as your stock transmissions and stock replacement aftermarket transmissions. I don't know if the FuryTech Micro Komodo will fit. Potentially it would, but I cannot verify. There's also a potential that a full-size Komodo would fit if you forward mounted it. But again, that's not a possibility that I've explored. It's not anything I've experimented with. It's up to you if you want to experiment with that yourself. And if you find, you know, other motors that fit, especially any brushless motors that fit, please let me know. You know, leave a comment on my YouTube channel, leave a comment on my Facebook page, Adventure 207 RC. I'll have that linked down in the description. You know, you could send me a message on my Instagram, Adventure 207 RC. Again, linked down in the description. You know, let me know what other motors you find that fit. Because if I find out there's one that's a sure fit, I might go brushless with this. I don't know. But anyway, so I find the easiest way to put this together is to get the hardest part out of the way first. Now you're gonna have to put your chassis rails on your skid plate, but you can't put any bolts in yet. So just make sure you've got them going the right way. This is the tricky part. Just get your chassis rails where they need to be. Hold them in place. Try to keep that motor wire out of the way as best you can. That's gonna be a pain in your ass. It is what it is. I like to just kind of try to snake it up through to the top of the cage somewhere out of the way. Now, the rear portion of the frame is designed to fit, if you can see it, into here. It's going to fit through that slot and around this risen plate. And now these aren't pre-drilled because you don't need to bolt the rear of the chassis on, but we'll get to that in just a second. So now I find the easiest way to go about this, and I'll try to keep you in camera frame here as best as I can. Bear with me. Find the easiest way to go about this. Like I said, snake that motor wire up out of the way. And then just start the rear of those chassis rails onto where they need to be. Again, this part isn't easy. Probably going to take 2 hands to get them lined up and get them started. It is a tight fit, but I promise you it does fit. Just a matter of fiddling with it a little bit, all the while trying to keep that skid plate engaged in those frame rails where they need to be. Now once you get it started, you're going to go ahead and get that assembly pushed back to where it needs to be. And then you're going to just bring your frame rails around those shock towers and make sure they're lined up with the bolt hole. Now, keep in mind, the bolt holes in the shock towers are made shallow so they print good. So you're going to want to go ahead and just grab a 1.1 or a 1.2 millimeter drill bit and just drill those out a little deeper. And then you can go ahead and just thread a bolt right into both sides. Or you also have the option to drill it all the way through and put a nut on the back side. And if you're going to do that, I would recommend taking a file or a Dremel or something and just notching that back some. So you don't need as long of a bolt. But once you've got it all in there where it needs to be, you can start putting your bolts in. And you know, if you want to, once you get the front bolted and you get down the sides bolted, so the chassis rails are in there where they need to be, you can go ahead and drill out these rear pieces and throw a bolt in on both sides there if you want to, but that's not really required. It fits tight enough back here that those chassis rails are going to be held in place solid enough anyways. And I mean, then you've got 4 bolts on each side of the rock sliders. So really, it's up to you what you want to do there. Now, just to save a lot of time in this video, I'm not going to show you everything in perfect detail. If you have any questions at all, go ahead and send me an email to a207rc@gmail.com. I'll have that link down in the description as well. That's a207rc@gmail.com. That's all lowercase. Just send me an email. You know, put right in the subject line, Fugly Truggy chassis question, FT chassis question, whatever. And I'll do the best I can to answer any questions that you have. But we're going to skip over, I mean, putting your links and everything in is just like any other SCX24. You're going to use your same mounts that you would. I recommend putting in your 2 center bolts on your skid plate, the 2 that only hold the skid plate first, and then the 2 for your shock mounts, and then start putting your links on, assembling your axles and everything. Now, your rear shocks, these are your rear shock mounts, or you also have the option to experiment, come up with your own. You know, if you want to just cut some holes in the floor of the flatbed and fabricate up your own cantilever style suspension, you know, go crazy. Do whatever you want to do. This chassis is designed around double barrel shocks, and that's really what I recommend for it, front and rear. But again, you know, you can experiment as much as you want and figure out what shocks work for you. I would recommend at the very least going with the hot racing long travel single barrels like I have on my wide body Blazer. They're, I believe, almost as long as a double barrel, but they're not, you know, they're not a double barrel. Now, the other things that I can tell you about this chassis, you will have to run Gladiator links. That's what this chassis is designed for. You can see here the way these rock sliders mount the chassis extension to the chassis rails. You're sliding your cab rear of center compared to where it used to be. So now your stock Gladiators, C10, whatever front link, I'm pretty sure all of those use the same front links. It's just the Deadbolt and Betty with the shorter front links. But your stock Gladiator front links will have your front end right where it's supposed to be. There'll be plenty of clearance for your cab. I'll show you the way you have to trim that in a minute. But in the rear, you have to run Gladiator rear links to get that axle back far enough, not only for optimal shock angle, but also optimal tire clearance. And I'll show you that once I get everything assembled. Again, I'm not going to show you assembling every step of it. I mean, most of it's easy and self-explanatory if you've ever assembled any SCX24. I just want to cover the musts and the, you know, the must-dos and the must-haves and whatnot. Now you can throw C10 rear links in the front, stretch that front end out as much as you want to. Really, it's up to you to experiment with what works, what doesn't work, but, you know, just as a general recommendation, you're gonna want a set of Gladiator links for the rears at least. Now, as far as cab fitting, you have a pedestal mount in the roof of the cage that is countersunk for a magnet. Now you can use any neodymium rare earth magnet that you want if you already got some, you know, as long as they fit in there. But I'll show you the ones that I'm using. These are Trimags. I got these on Amazon. Get one out here. So I'll go ahead and calipers are ready for a new battery. These are 12 millimeters in diameter and just over 2.5 millimeters thick. So what I will do when this all goes together is I'll set one of those right down in there, and I'm going to end up gluing mine in with E6000. That's what I recommend you use. Now, keep in mind, if you get these magnets to use, it is a little bit of a tight fit once you have it painted and you know, you get that built up. But that's minor. Now, as far as cab modifications, obviously, you know, it's your chassis. You can trim up different bodies and try to find something that works, but keep in mind, this chassis was designed specifically to fit a trimmed SCX24 C10 cab. All the measurements were taken off of this cab. It's designed to fit this cab fairly tight. I don't believe it'll fit any 24 scale model kit cabs, but again, you're free to try anything you want. Now, to make this cab fit properly, there's some things you're going to have to do. Number one, obviously, cut the bed completely off. just get rid of it. And I find also trim these nubs back a ways. You can see how much of a little shelf I left right there. You can cut that completely off. You don't have to leave a shelf if you don't want to. But that shelf sits just a fraction of a millimeter above the rear portion of the chassis right here. So you can go ahead and leave that little shelf if you want. Just make sure you cut it back close enough to the cab that you can slide the cab down in where it needs to be. Once you've got the bed cut off, your fenders can be trimmed as much or as little as you want depending on the tire size that you're running. That's really going to be the deciding factor on how much you cut off of your fenders. You know, you can go ahead and just slice the whole hood right off if you want to. I radiused mine out quite a ways, and I may end up going and taking a little bit more out of the side of the hood as well on both sides, just because it's still a tight clearance on those Swamp Kings. And then you're gonna have to cut your grill pretty much completely off. I cut it right up to what the bottom of the hood would be. And you have to do that for servo clearance. And I'll show you that again once this is all together. The only other modification to make to the cab, to make this fit as intended, this one's more optional. I cut my rocker panels off right at the bottom door seam. So how you've got your door seams kind of molded in place. You've got the front one and the rear one. And then there's the bottom one. Cut it right along that bottom door seam line on both sides. You get your rocker panels off. And then this cab is designed to fit down around the cage and then clamp itself on to the rock sliders to help hold it in place down there. And then, of course, the magnet holds it on. Or you also could drill a couple holes into each rock slider and bolt the cab on if you wanted to. That's always an option. But to make it fit as good as possible, once I had it all trimmed, I went ahead and just folded those doors down. I didn't crease them very much, but just, you know, just work them down a little bit like that. That brings the bottom of those doors closer together. And then once you've got everything else all assembled, the cab slides on fairly easy. I usually start it from the front just to get it around all the bars. Then you can just pick up on the nose of it, kind of squeeze a little bit, get the back slotted down into there, pull the doors down over the rock sliders, and then of course once it's actually all magnetized, it'll stick there pretty nicely. Then as far as your electronics go, it is a little bit tricky to fit your ESC in there, but the place it's gonna go is right down on top of that driver's side rock slider, and you can see it's been cut out a little bit. And there's also a relief cut on the top driver's door bar in there to allow clearance for that ESC. The way I am putting mine in is it'll go in this way. So all your plugs over here for your steering, channel 2, all that will go at the back. And then your motor and battery plugs will go at the top facing in. Now you can leave your little tab there for your drag brake that comes on these V1s. You leave that right on there, that fits perfect. But to get this in place, you're gonna go in through the rear window with it. And then comes the tricky part. You can actually get it in a little easier if you pull that drag brake tab off, get the ESC down in place, and then put it back on from in here with a pair of tweezers, but that can be a little fiddly. But if you just take it like this, kind of force that tab down around that rear bar, then you can start to get it in place better. You'll see it starts to slide down in all on its own. Then you might have to, it's going to take a little bit of work, but you know, you might have to force it by that windshield bar a little bit but then it'll just kind of start to sit down in there. And then all you got to do is get that drag brake tab down past that other rear bar. Once you do that, and you get your ESC set down in there, obviously you can just kind of leave it in there loose. It really can't go far. The hardest plug to get on is going to be your steering plug. You're going to have to work at it. I recommend using a pair of tweezers, but there is enough room in there to get it on. I promise you. I've already done it. It can be done. And then, now this way, all I've got to do when I want to turn it on is pop the cab off, flip the switch, and it's right there. Or, also, you can go ahead and just cut the driver's side window out of the cab, and you can get to the switch right from there, too, if you wanted to. Now, the battery, your stock battery is going to fit, no problem. I have a Helios 600 milliamp hour battery that does not fit. It's too long and it interferes with the ESC. But these EcoPower 450 milliamp hour batteries give you a great run time. This is what I use in my wide body C10 75% of the time. This fits great. You're going to have to take the cab off, obviously, and then load it through the rear window. I put it in with the wires to this side, and I like to take that balance wire and just kind of tuck it. And then when I go to put it in, it's a little tricky because this battery seems to have kind of stiff wires that hold their shape, and they're really molded for my wide body C10. But you just load it through the back. I fish the wire out through the door bars there, and just sits down in place. And I mean, you can come up with, you know, if you want to put some Velcro pads there to hold the battery in place or whatever you want to do, but honestly, I'm just going to leave it in there loose. It's not going to go anywhere. It makes it easier to get out when you need to change it. And then, now obviously over here, your battery wire won't fit back over to the ESC. So what I'm going to do is just make a small extension wire to run from the ESC across that firewall somewhere in there that I can just plug the battery into, throw the cab on, and go wheeling. And there we have it. It's all together. So, you can see up front here, your servo is going to sit right in front of the chassis. And with your Gladiator links in the front, that front bar almost acts as a bump stop. So you don't have too much up travel to where it starts to get into your body with these bigger tires. So it works out pretty good. You know, if that is in your way and you want more up travel, you can always just cut those bars out of there and then you're fine. But you can see how and where I've got my front shocks mounted in there. As far as wiring goes, I've made a jumper wire that my battery plugs into right over here. That just plugs into the ESC. Like I said, I can get right to the switch right there. Turn it on and off. Battery fits down in there nicely. I don't know how well you can see it, but there's plenty of clearance in there for your plug-in for your servo, as well as your little tab there for the drag brake setting. It's not the easiest thing to package all your electronics into, but it certainly can be done. And I've just got all my wires tucked over out of the way. And now this 450 milliamp hour battery with the motor and battery extension wires plugged in, the battery actually pushes down in there nicely, right up against the door bars on this side of the cage and right up against those wires on the ESC. So I mean, that battery's gonna have to get jostled pretty hard to come out of there. So I'm not worried about putting anything for a tie down on there. But yeah, so like I said, as far as putting your links and everything else together, it's no different than assembling any other SCX24. The biggest recommendation I can give you is when you start putting your screws in, like I said, start with the two middle ones that only hold the skid plate, but don't tighten anything up. Get all of your screws started before you tighten up any of them. You know, you're just going to save yourself a little bit of headache trying to get things fitted. You know, the holes might not line up exactly perfectly on yours depending on, you know, printing settings. And I found with 3D printing, there's all kinds of anomalies you can't really account for sometimes, but you can always open up the holes a little bit on the inside too if you need to, make them fit a little easier. But yeah, then you can see I've got my magnet here. I'm actually still waiting for the glue to dry on the inside of the cab, so I don't have the cab on yet. But then I just took a piece of 15 thousandths styrene and glued that to the bottom of the magnet in the cab. I like to do that when I magnet mount bodies. I did that with my Blazer build when I did the magnets up under the hood. I just glued a piece of Lexan to the bottom of them. I find it cuts down on the pull of the magnets, especially these strong rare earth magnets. Makes it a little easier to get the cab on and off without ripping the magnet off accidentally. So, I mean, you can see it's all bound. Everything works. So, goes together pretty easy, honestly. Like I said, the cage is tight. It's a little work to squeeze all of the electronics in there and get all of that stuff situated. I found when you go to put your ESC in and plug all your wires in, go ahead and take the little jumper tab for the drag brake right off. Then set the ESC down in there, but set it in, get it in there so you've got it sideways so you can come in from the back side and get that servo plugged in a little bit easier. Get it tilted back into where it's supposed to be, and then go ahead and plug in that drag brake tab. And you know, it's a tight enough fit in there. You shouldn't have to glue or tape your ESC down at all if you don't want to. I mean, mine's between all the wiring and everything that's jammed in there. Mine's not going anywhere. And the new versions of the EcoPower 827s don't have just one long wire anymore. They've got a short lead that comes off the servo, and then they give you an extension wire. So if you wanted to, you could cut and trim that extension wire to make it fit your application a little better. I didn't do that. I just, you know, bunched it up inside underneath the battery tray because there's plenty of room for it, and I didn't really have that much extra. But you can see I just zip tied it right to the bar there, and then the plugs where the extension plugs into the lead off the servo is actually sitting right up against that ESC and just helping to hold it in place a little bit better. So, like I said, if you've got any questions as far as installing your Fugly Truggy chassis, send me an email. Let me know what your questions are. I'll do my best to answer them. And, you know, and again, I really appreciate you buying the files and making your own.